If you believe that if we have to enter a room with the gunman, our best chances of survival will be dependent on how long it takes us to see the threat, like this video, leave a comment, and subscribe to the channel if you're not already. I'm going to be discussing two primary methods of entry, that is dumping into the room or taking the room, or stepping center to the threshold before actually going into the room. And when I talk about these two concepts, I want to primarily focus on vision, meaning what are we seeing and when. Before I get into that, I am going to cover the basic fundamental principles of CQB for those who may not be aware, so they can also make an informed decision. So as you see, I have three individuals stacked up here, and as they're approaching this doorway of this center fed room, and they go ahead and take the room as the principles allow us to do, that first person is probably going to go in the direction they're looking, so that first corner to the right, and the second individual is going to take that first person's back, focusing on this left corner here. That third individual will be stepping center of the threshold as they're entering the room, and their primary focus, if the two-man goes here, is to step to the right, and their focus will be center of the room, back within a meter of their partner. Now, when that first person enters the room and goes to that hard corner to the right, that's where their vision is. Their vision is where they're looking until they determine that there is not a threat there. Once they decide that there is not a threat within their view, they will then scan back to the center of the room or back to within a meter this direction over here. The number two guy, as his vision takes him immediately to this left corner here, and he has decided that there is not a threat in that immediate corner, he is now scanning back to the other side of the room as well. That third individual that enters the room, he's basically going to be looking center of the room as he's stepping through the threshold, and his vision will be center of the room, back within a meter of his partner on the right side of the room. That is what the fundamental principles tell us that we should be doing. Now, let's actually place a threat inside this room, and let's focus on vision and determine how well those fundamental principles allow us to win this encounter. So for this scenario here, we're going to put a bad guy in the room right here in this corner, or center of the room in this corner here. And this is the standard. This is a person with a gun who is ready and willing to shoot, because if the standard doesn't exist, then we can get away with entering the room however we want. Now, utilizing the fundamental principles of CQB and taking the room or dumping into the room, that first person is going to go ahead and he's going to take that corner in which he's looking, the direction he's going. So he's going to take that hard corner to the right. And of course, his vision is to the right. Now, as he is taking the room, as soon as he exposes himself to the threshold, which is historically what bad guys do, as soon as you expose yourself to the threshold, this is when bad guys start shooting. So as he's making entry into the room, he's already being shot by this person over here. And that's going to become even more problematic, because the number two guy, as he takes his back here and checks this left corner, and I'll play a video for you on the screen, you can see that it's going to take at least a second and a half for that person to get into that corner and get your back, and especially if you factor in the time it takes to decide whether it's a shoot, a no shoot, or there's even a threat there. So the first guy's getting hit by the suspect, and that second individual, that second officer, his vision is now here. So neither the one guy or the two guy have seen where the threat is at this point, and the two guys probably going down as well. Now, typically, officers, even if they're mortally wounded, they'll still fight, especially if we're talking about SWAT guys. So usually they're going to be able to kind of, at least put rounds on this individual here. But in a situation where they can't, maybe they're mortally wounded, or they're just hurt so badly they can't respond, and especially if they're shot in the head or they're killed, the third guy, as he steps center or begins his movement through the threshold, even though he is center of the room, back within a meter of his partner, if he's heard shooting and he sees where the threat is, I will give you that he will actually go ahead and just shoot the guy where he knows where the guy is, and come back to his side of the room. That's probably what he's going to do. It's unrealistic to assume that in that situation, that third guy is going to just check center and come back, and then come back and get this guy. So I'm just going to give you that third guy will be able to address that threat there. Why is that problematic? It's problematic because our vision is taking us away from where the threat is. The one and two guy are never seeing it, and then the third guy is having to come in and pick it up. That, in my opinion, is a lot of destruction. Now, what about a situation where the bad guy is positioned here, okay? Same kind of scenario, basically. One guy is going to go in to that hard corner to the right. He's going to be getting engaged. That second guy is going to take this hard corner to the left. He's also going to be engaged at that point. And probably, depending on where this suspect is on this left side, because he is stepping and going to the right, is going to take him longer to even see where the threat is. He's probably going to check center as he's coming through, but he's not going to be able to see this immediately, and he doesn't know where the threat is, so he's going to do his job, leaving it the fourth guy's responsibility to come in and now determine where the threat is. Again, all of that sounds very bad. All of that seems like high levels of destruction happening. Now I want to focus on stepping center before going into the room. So if we step center before going into the room, which can be done quickly, right? That first officer or individual is simply going to step within the center of the threshold. And when he does that, he's going to open up his vision, right? He's going to be able to see a majority of the room at that point, except for the hard corners. That, in my opinion, is going to give that individual the best chances at immediately seeing where the threat is, especially since we know that suspects or bad guys like to shoot at good guys as soon as they expose themselves to the front of the threshold, which means that if the threat sees him and he starts shooting, that individual will then see where the threat is most likely and potentially or hopefully be able to respond because he's actually looking where the threat is. If he doesn't see the threat immediately, that gunfire is going to draw you to where the threat is. Now, in that situation, if that initial individual gets hit by gunfire and he goes down, at least he's going down outside the room instead of inside the room. And it allows the other individuals to now probably egress away from the threshold, which is usually what happens at that point. Now, this is where people like to point out that walls are not cover. And I will just ask you that if we're going to point out that walls aren't cover, then offer up a better solution, right? Because when people say walls aren't cover, I believe that they're saying that the only other solution is to now go inside the room or be inside the room where the threat is, giving you the best chances at survival. I've shown you videos in the past of individuals shooting inside the room from the outside and their rounds deflecting off the threshold and never making it inside the room. Well, that also works the other way, right? And so my opinion is that although walls are not cover, and in some cases they can be, especially if you look at hotel rooms. So next time you're in a hotel, stand outside that threshold and look inside, because those walls are usually pretty long, right, to actually get to the living area. So there's a lot of things that those rounds have to go through, and usually those thresholds are not made out of wood. And so there's a high likelihood that that round will be given an opportunity to do something else before it actually hits you. I liken the walls are not cover similarly to when people say vehicles are not cover. Well, again, telling me that my vehicle isn't cover isn't all that helpful, because I drive a vehicle every single day and I'm always going to have my vehicle with me, as long as I'm in or around my vehicle. And that's why you see officers always using vehicles as cover, because it's the most immediate thing that they have in that moment to use to their advantage. If you're in the middle of the street, is it better to run to a tree that is smaller, but maybe hide your body to work around that? Maybe I don't think so, because that's not allowing you to have the ability and the freedom of movement, whereas a vehicle gives you more options. This situation here is a situation that doesn't get exposed in training. It doesn't get exposed because paper targets don't shoot back. And in cases where there's a bad guy in there with simunition, when we actually get hit, we don't go down, right? We just work through it. One guy goes in, he gets hit. Second guy goes in, he gets hit. They collapse down, they shoot the guy with their simunition, and we kind of call it a win. And you can't actually even replicate this in training unless you coach or tell people, hey, if you get hit, fall down. I guess that's the best way of doing it. But usually what happens in training, they'll make entry, they'll get hit, and then someone will tell them, hey, you're down, and then they fall down, right? And so that's not a really good representation of reality, in my opinion. And so as you've seen these two concepts here, understanding where our vision takes us when we're executing the basic principles of CQB, Let me know what you think in the comment section, if it's better to just dump into the room without seeing the majority of the room first, or step center before actually going into the room. And I understand that not every tactic works in every situation. This is dependent on a number of different factors, whether or not you utilize this technique. Maybe there's additional threats that you don't want to expose yourself to. But I would also say, in a situation where we have the opportunity to not just step center, but actually pan the entire threshold, what is that allowing us to do? Well, now in that situation where we had a guy over here along this wall, if we step center, or we actually pan all the way across because the environment allows us to do that, that one-on-one gunfight is happening right here. Again, maybe he goes down, but now, and even for the second guy, if he sees that this first guy went down right there and he wasn't shot at as he was panning this way, where does that tell you where the threat is? Probably tells me the threat's over here, because now he's over here and he goes down, and maybe even better if he got rounds off. Additionally, that's telling me, okay, he's this direction as the number 2 guy, allowing me to step over or get into place to be able to put rounds on this guy. And so my opinion is that when the environment allows you to, when time allows you to, stepping center at least is going to give you the best opportunity to actually see where the bad guy is, thus increasing the time it takes you to actually put rounds on the threat. There are a few additional benefits to stepping center before going into the room that maybe you haven't thought about yet. Now, traditionally, if we're going to take this room or dump into this room in the traditional way, and the number 1 guy goes where he's looking towards the hard corner to the right, well, the number 2 guy now has to button hook into this left corner here. It's not the end of the world. It can be done, and we can make that seem seamless. I would argue that if we were set up crisscross and we could both go the direction that we're looking, that's probably preferred. If we step center before going into the room and the number 1 guy takes that initial snapshot of the room, the number 2 guy would be looking towards that hard corner, seeing what he can see briefly. As the number 1 guy starts moving towards the threshold, the number 2 guy can actually stack behind the number 1 guy as he gives up coverage on that corner. And now both those individuals are entering the room from a neutral position. So it's really not a big deal if they have to go left or go right. And I would argue, instead of button hooking, that would be preferred, because it's probably going to get us to the target faster or allow us to cover our partner's back a little bit faster. So that's an additional benefit. Most people, I don't think, look at it that way, but that's something that I was doing for a long time, and I really like that. If the number 1 guy pushed and took that center snapshot, I would be focusing on that hard corner, or what I can see of that right side of the room. As soon as I see that number 1 guy start moving towards the threshold, I'm immediately getting stacked behind him, focusing on him and the direction that he goes so that I can go opposite. And in my opinion, it's just a more seamless way to actually enter this room versus having to button hook. The other benefit of stepping center before going into the room is being able to identify obstructions in the room. Now, when we train, at most there's maybe a fridge or a couch or a table or a chair in some of these training locations, but there's almost never things on the ground that cause you to have to navigate or, potentially stumble over. And anybody who's conducted CQB or searched residential areas, in the United States, in areas where maybe warrants are being served, knows that a lot of these places are extremely cluttered. That can be problematic if we're starting from a position where we're not seeing the room and we just go ahead and dump into the room or take the room. I would also argue that if you had a group of guys, let's say there was 4 guys, and they said, we don't like stepping center, we don't like looking into the room before we go in, we prefer to dump into the room, that's our thing. Would they allow me to set up a scenario that is replicating an actual picture of a residence or a room where there is these things on the ground, this clutter on the ground, things that they would have to navigate that they wouldn't actually know that they have to navigate? And I would argue they probably wouldn't take me up on that offer and then allow me to post the video, because you're probably going to see individuals falling down or tripping, and most people don't want that kind of stuff out there. And so again, another benefit to stepping center is being able to see these obstructions and then knowing that you have to navigate them once you actually walk inside the room. In a training environment, We don't replicate that, probably for safety reasons, but in residential structures, apartments, where these warrants are being run or we're having to search these places, you can't even really get to your route or run your route. So one of the benefits of just dumping into the room or eventually taking the room is that we're able to create angles, usually in a training environment, so that we can maximize, our firepower to different parts of the room essentially. Most of the time, or a lot of the time, again, in these places where warrants are being ran, you can't even get to your route. And so we're not getting that added benefit of being able to create these angles, these intersecting fields of fire. And so again, I would suggest that it would be more beneficial to getting some information inside the room from the outside before actually making entry. If you haven't subscribed yet, you can do that by tapping on this photo. And if you have an opinion, like I'm sure everybody does, you can let me know about it in the comment section.